I never imagined the day that should have been mine, the one day a year when I felt entitled to be celebrated, would become the day my world fell apart. My name is Emily. I'm 32, and until that night I thought I understood betrayal. I thought it was something whispered behind closed doors, something you only learned about in fragments. I didn't know it could sit across the table from you, raise a glass in your honor, and then shatter everything you believed was solid. It was my birthday. The restaurant glowed with the soft warmth of candlelight. Friends and family gathered around the long wooden table, the hum of laughter and clinking glasses weaving together in celebration. I wore a dress Mark had picked out for me months earlier, a pale blue that he said made my eyes look brighter. At the time, that compliment had felt like love. Now I wonder if it was guilt. If my sister Lauren sat across from me, her smile wide, her eyes shining with a secret she seemed barely able to contain. We'd always been close, though not without tension. Growing up, Lauren had a way of stepping into my spotlight, of turning moments that should have been mine into a stage for herself. Still, I loved her, trusted her. She was my sister. Halfway through dinner, just as the waiter brought out my cake vanilla with buttercream roses, my favorite, Lauren cleared her throat. She tapped her glass with her spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. She looked directly at me when she said it, as if the words were a gift meant only for me. Then she smiled, placed a hand over her stomach, and said, "I'm pregnant." The table erupted in cheers, gasps, applause. My parents hugged each other, friends clapped, and for a moment I clapped too, swept up in the shock of it. But then she said his name. "Mark, and I wanted you all to know." Mark, my husband. I can still hear the sound of my own laughter, then high-pitched and brittle like glass cracking under pressure. At first I thought it was some cruel joke, some twisted way of stealing the spotlight from me yet again. But when I looked at Mark, his face was pale, his eyes fixed on the table, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look at me. The room spun. My birthday candles flickered, casting long shadows across faces I had known my whole life, faces now blurred by the tears welling in my eyes. I stood my chair screeching against the floor, and in that silence, broken only by the hum of the restaurant around us, I felt my entire life collapse inward. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to throw my glass in his face, to drag my sister out into the street and make her confess every detail. But I didn't. Not there. Not with everyone watching. My dignity was the only thing I had left to cling to, and so I forced a smile, whispered a thank you for sharing, and excused myself to the bathroom. In the mirror, my reflection looked like a stranger's. My makeup was flawless, my hair perfectly styled, but beneath the surface I was unraveling. I pressed my palms against the cool porcelain sink, forcing myself to breathe, to think. I couldn't let them see me break. Not yet. That night, after the dinner ended, in awkward fragments, and I returned home to the house that no longer felt like mine, I sat in the dark living room waiting. Mark walked in hours later, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't try to explain. He didn't apologize. He just said, "I'm sorry you found out this way." Those words sliced through me like a blade. This way, as if there could ever be a right way for a wife to discover her husband had not only betrayed her, but done so with her own sister. My voice shook as I asked him how long, why, what they thought would happen. His answers were vague, rehearsed. "It just happened. We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't plan for it to go this far." Lies, every one of them. Because betrayal is never an accident. It's a choice made over and over until the truth can no longer be hidden. I barely slept that night, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. My phone buzzed with messages from Lauren. Pleased to talk, promises that we could work through this as a family. I couldn't even bring myself to reply. Family had always meant safety, loyalty, love. Now it was the word that hurt the most. The following days blurred together in a haze of shock and rage. Friends called, some offering sympathy, others fishing for gossip. My parents, torn between their daughters, begged me not to make a scene. But how could I not? My marriage was ashes, my sister carried my husband's child, and I was expected to sit quietly while they built a life out of my destruction. I started digging. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the spark of survival, but I knew there had to be more. Betrayal like theirs rarely exists in isolation. With trembling hands, I logged into our shared laptop late one night, scrolling through Mark's emails. That's when I found the message that changed everything. It was from Lauren. The subject line read, "Our plan." My stomach dropped as I clicked it open. Inside paragraphs laid out a future I was never meant to be part of. Plans for money, for selling shares of Mark's company, for moving into a new house together once the divorce was finalized. They hadn't just fallen into betrayal, they had orchestrated it, calculated it, built a future on the ruins of my life. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, my heart pounding in my ears. Every word was a knife, every sentence proof that I had been nothing more than a stepping stone in their climb toward what they thought was happiness. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't vanish, but it hardened into something sharper. Rage, yes, but also clarity. I would not let them write me out of my own story. If they wanted war, they had chosen the wrong woman to betray. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The glow of the laptop screen still burned behind my eyelids, each word from that email carved into my mind like an accusation. Our plan. Those two words looped endlessly in my head, mocking me. My husband and my sister weren't just careless lovers, they were co-conspirators. They weren't just breaking my heart, they were dismantling my life piece by piece and drafting a blueprint for the aftermath. I sat in the living room until dawn, staring at the walls, listening to the silence that now felt heavier than any scream. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, and I felt the weight of every second pressing down. Rage swelled in me, fierce and unfamiliar. For years I had been the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the sister who gave Lauren her way, the wife who bent herself to Mark's silences. But something broke inside me that night, and what replaced it was harder, sharper. The next morning, I showered, dressed, and went about my day as if nothing had changed. I needed time. I needed to think. Rage without a plan is just noise, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flail. They had a plan. Now I would have one too. Lauren showed up uninvited 2 days later, standing at my front door with that same pleading expression she wore as a child when she broke something of mine and begged me not to tell Mom. Except this time what she broke was my marriage. I let her in not out of kindness, but because I wanted to look her in the eye as she tried to justify the unjustifiable. She talked in circles, saying things like, "We never meant for it to happen," and "You have to believe me, Emily. I still love you. You're my sister." I sat there silent, watching her squirm, waiting for a glimpse of the remorse I craved. But what I saw instead was desperation, not for my forgiveness, but for my silence. She wanted me to keep the peace again, to bury this betrayal the way I had buried her smaller transgressions growing up. I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "You slept with my husband. You're carrying his child. And you call this love?" She flinched, tears welling, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sisterly bond, just the cold clarity of truth. After she left, I sat with her words echoing in my mind, and I knew then I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't hand them my life and let them live happily ever after in the ruins of mine. They had chosen war, and so would I. I called Jessica, my best friend since college, the one person I trusted completely. She listened quietly as I poured everything out: the dinner, the pregnancy, the email, the lies. When I finished, there was a long silence, and then she said, "Emily, you need evidence, real evidence. If they're planning to take you down in court, you need to be ready to fight back." Her words lit a fire in me. Evidence. Proof. If Lauren and Mark thought they could manipulate me into silence, they had underestimated me. I wasn't the naive wife or the forgiving sister anymore. I was a woman with nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. I began digging deeper. Every night after work, I scoured Mark's files, his bank statements, his messages. At first, it was tedious lines of numbers, routine emails, nothing incriminating. But then patterns began to emerge. Large transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, expenses that didn't match our lifestyle, meetings with names I had never heard. One night, buried in a folder Mark must have thought was well hidden, I found what I was looking for: contracts falsified, invoices, documents that screamed of embezzlement. My hands trembled as I scrolled through them, realization dawning with each line. Mark wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying his company, his colleagues, the very foundation of the life we'd built together. And Lauren, my own sister, was complicit. Her emails to him confirmed it, their plans detailed down to the dollar. They weren't just planning a life together, they were planning to fund it with stolen money. I sat back, breathless, my heart pounding. For a moment, the grief threatened to consume me again. But then I saw it for what it was: a weapon. They thought they held all the power, but now I had the truth. Cold, undeniable, devastating truth. I printed everything, hiding the papers in a folder I tucked beneath the floorboards of my closet. It felt dramatic, paranoid even, but I couldn't risk them finding out what I knew. Not yet. Timing would be everything. The days that followed were a performance. At dinners with family, I smiled through clenched teeth as Lauren played the glowing mother-to-be, and Mark sat smugly by her side. I listened to their excuses, their attempts to rewrite history to paint their betrayal as fate as love. And all the while, I carried my secret folder of proof, a ticking time bomb beneath my feet. At night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I rehearsed the moment in my head. The moment when their lies would unravel, when the truth would crash down on them as it had crashed down on me. I pictured the look on their faces when the evidence was laid bare, when the world finally saw them for what they truly were. I didn't know exactly when that moment would come, but I knew this much: it would come. And when it did, I wouldn't just be the woman they betrayed. I would be the woman who destroyed the future they had built on my pain. The longer I carried the weight of their secret, the sharper it cut into me. Every time I saw Lauren's hand rest protectively on her stomach, every time I caught Mark avoiding my eyes, I felt the rage coil tighter inside my chest. I had proof of their lies, evidence of their crimes, and yet I had to play my part. The wronged wife, the betrayed sister, silent in my suffering. That silence became my armor, because I knew the louder I screamed, the more they would prepare. Patience would be my weapon. Jessica kept me steady. She came over often, sitting with me at the kitchen table while we sorted through papers, whispering strategies into the quiet of my home. "You have to time it right," she said more than once. "If you go in too soon, they'll twist the story, make you the villain. But if you wait, if you let them believe they've already won, that's when the truth will hit hardest." It was advice I clung to, because as much as I wanted to storm into the next family gathering and throw the evidence in their faces, I knew that would only hand them the chance to spin it, to turn my pain into drama and my proof into accusations. No, I wanted them cornered with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The chance came sooner than I expected. My parents invited us all over one Sunday afternoon. It was meant to be a family meeting, though I knew what that really meant. They wanted me to forgive, to find some way forward for the sake of family unity. The hypocrisy stung. They had always taught me that family was sacred, that loyalty was everything. And now, when the betrayal came from within, they wanted me to swallow it in silence. I arrived late, on purpose, folder tucked into my bag, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they'd hear it the moment I walked in. Lauren was already there, glowing in a way that made bile rise in my throat. Mark sitting close by, his hand resting possessively on her knee. My parents fluttered between them, offering tea, asking about nursery colors, already weaving this betrayal into the fabric of our family as if it belonged there. I sat across from them, folding my hands in my lap to stop them from trembling. My father cleared his throat. "Emily," he began gently, "we know this is hard, but family doesn't turn its back on family. We need to find a way to move forward." I almost laughed. The audacity of it, the expectation that I should be the one to bend, to carry their sins on my back, ignited something fierce inside me. But instead of exploding, I smiled. "You're right," I said softly. "Family doesn't turn its back on family. That's why I think you should all see the truth." And with that, I pulled out the folder. The room shifted instantly. Lauren's smile faltered. Mark's face drained of color. My mother frowned confused while my father's brow knit in concern. I laid the papers on the coffee table one by one, the falsified invoices, the bank transfers, the email titled, "Our Plan." Each page landed like a stone in the silence, the weight of them undeniable. "While you were planning your future," I said, my voice steady. "Now you are also planning a crime. Embezzlement. Fraud. Lies stacked on top of betrayal." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. Mark leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with the panic of a cornered animal. "Emily," he hissed, "you don't understand." "No," I cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You thought you could break me, replace me, build your life on the ashes of mine. But you underestimated me." My parents sat frozen, the reality settling over them like a storm cloud. The daughter they had urged me to forgive was no innocent. The son-in-law they had defended was no victim of circumstance. The truth was undeniable, and I had delivered it with the precision of a blade. For the first time in weeks, I felt power surge back into me. Not the power of rage, but of clarity. They could no longer rewrite the story, no longer paint me as bitter or hysterical. The evidence spoke louder than any of their lies. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. She whispered my name, but I felt nothing. No pity, no bond. Only the deep, steady satisfaction of a woman who had been pushed too far and had finally pushed back. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood. "You wanted a way forward," I said to my parents. "This is mine." I left the house with my head high, the sound of their silence following me out the door. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove home in silence that night, the folder heavy on the passenger seat beside me like a co-pilot. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but it was the ache of holding on to something powerful, something finally mine. For weeks I had been the victim in everyone's eyes, the wife humiliated, the sister betrayed. But now I held the truth, and the truth had teeth. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat there in the car watching the porch light flicker against the shadows and let the weight of it all settle over me. I wasn't naive enough to think the war was won. This was only the beginning. But I knew in my bones that the tide had shifted. They would never again see me as weak as a woman they could walk over in pursuit of their own happiness. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No calls from Lauren, no visits from Mark. My parents left hesitant messages on my voicemail, asking if we could talk calmly, but I let them ring into silence. I knew what they really wanted: to smooth things over, to bury the ugliness under a thin veneer of family unity. But this wasn't something that could be buried. Not anymore. Then came the email. It arrived late one night as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea I couldn't bring myself to drink. The subject line was simple. "Please." It was from Lauren. My finger hovered over the delete key, but something made me click. Her words spilled across the screen, desperate and trembling. "Emily, I'm begging you, don't ruin us. I know what we did was unforgivable, but think of the baby. Think of Mom and Dad. If this goes public, it will destroy everything. Please, I need you. I'm still your sister." I stared at those lines until the letters blurred. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug, the instinct to protect her, to put family above all else, to shoulder the burden so others wouldn't have to. But then the memory of that birthday dinner rose up in me like bile, the sound of her voice announcing her pregnancy with my husband's child, as if it were a gift to be celebrated. My stomach turned. My stomach. I replied with one sentence: "You destroyed this family, not me." Then I hit send and closed the laptop. The next morning, Mark showed up at my door. His face was drawn, his once confident posture slouched into something closer to defeat. He asked to come in, and against my better judgment, I let him. He paced the living room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. "Emily, listen, we can fix this. We can figure something out. You don't have to do this." I watched him, amazed at the audacity. "Do what, Mark? Tell the truth. Expose the lies. You're terrified because you know what you've done isn't just betrayal, it's criminal." His eyes narrowed, his voice dropped. "You think you can take me down? You'll lose everything too. Divorce, scandal, the whispers at every family gathering, you'll be nothing." I stood then, every ounce of pain I'd carried hardening into steel. I already lost everything, Mark. The moment you chose her. The difference is I don't need to lie or steal to build a life from the ashes. You do. He left soon after, slamming the door so hard the frames rattled on the walls. I sank onto the couch, my body shaking, but not from fear, from release. For the first time, I felt stronger than him, stronger than both of them. The following week, Jessica connected me with a lawyer she trusted, sharp, unflinching, the kind of woman who looked at my folder of evidence and nodded with grim satisfaction. "This isn't just divorce material," she said. "This is leverage. With this, you won't just walk away, you'll walk away with everything they tried to steal from you." Her words wrapped around me like armor. For weeks, I had lived in survival mode, clinging to scraps of dignity. But now I had a weapon, a plan, a path forward. At night, I still lay awake, sometimes staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Lauren smiled across the birthday table and announced her pregnancy. The wound was still raw, the betrayal still fresh. But layered over the pain was something new, something steady, resolve. They had thought they broke me, but all they did was awaken a part of me I never knew existed, the part that could stand in the fire and not burn, the part that could take betrayal and forge it into power. And I promised myself this: the next time we sat across from each other in a room, it would not be me who crumbled. It would be them. The day of reckoning came not with drama, but with paperwork. My lawyer moved swiftly, filing for divorce on grounds of adultery, attaching the first pieces of evidence from my folder. She assured me that what I held wasn't just leverage, it was a shield, a fortress that would keep them from taking anything more from me. When Mark was served, the news traveled like wildfire. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, some shocked, some pretending they hadn't already suspected, others offering support I wasn't sure I could accept. What mattered wasn't their sympathy, it was that the story was no longer mine to carry alone. It was out in the open, and they could no longer pretend it was anything less than treachery. Lauren called, her voice frantic when I didn't pick up. Her voicemails piled up, each one a blend of tears and fury. "How could you do this to us?" she cried in one. "We're family." In another, her tone hardened. "You'll regret this, Emily. You think you've won, but you don't know what you're starting." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. As if I had started this war. As if I had chosen to betray her instead of the other way around. It was a strange kind of comfort, realizing that even in her desperation, she couldn't see the truth. She had set this fire, and now she was choking on the smoke. Court loomed like a shadow over every day. I prepared with my lawyer, laying out the timeline, connecting the dots between the affair and the financial schemes. She advised me to stay calm, to let the evidence speak louder than any words. "They'll try to paint you as hysterical, vengeful," she warned. "Don't give them that power. Give them silence, give them dignity. That's what will cut the deepest." And so I practiced stillness. In the mirror, I rehearsed looking at them without flinching. I imagined Lauren's crocodile tears, Mark's false bravado, and I trained myself to let them pass over me like waves crashing against a rock. The first hearing was surreal. I sat at one table, my lawyer at my side, while Mark and Lauren sat across from me. Their lawyer shuffling papers, whispering urgently. Lauren avoided my eyes, her hands folded tightly over her stomach. Mark, however, couldn't stop looking at me, his expression a cocktail of resentment and fear. It was the first time I had seen him look powerless, and it gave me a strength I hadn't known I still had. When my lawyer presented the documents, the bank transfers, the invoices, the email titled "Our Plan," the judge's expression hardened. He asked questions, his tone sharp, and I watched as Mark's facade cracked. He stammered, tried to deflect, but the evidence was ironclad. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. Lauren finally spoke, her voice trembling as she said, "Emily, please don't do this. We're family." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no longing for the bond we once had. Just emptiness, a clean slate, where she used to live in my heart. And I realized that was its own kind of revenge, taking away the power she had always held over me. The hearing ended with decisions deferred, more sessions to come. But the damage was already done. Their reputations were tarnished, their lies exposed. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, the late afternoon sun warming my face like a quiet blessing. That night, Jessica came over with a bottle of wine. We sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below us, and for the first time since my birthday, I felt free. Not healed, not whole, but free. I knew the road ahead would still be long papers to sign, custody battles to navigate, whispers to endure. But I also knew this: I was no longer the woman they had betrayed. I was the woman who had faced betrayal head on and refused to crumble. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the faintest spark of something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. The weeks after that first hearing stretched out like an endless corridor. Every step forward in court felt like dragging chains heavy with the weight of betrayal. Yet each time I walked into that courtroom, each time I sat across from Mark and Lauren, I grew stronger. My silence, once a prison, had become my weapon. Lauren tried to reach me in every way she could. Handwritten letters left at my door, emails with subject lines like, "From your sister who still loves you." Even late-night calls that went unanswered. I read some of the words, skimmed others, but none of them touched me. She was desperate, but not for my forgiveness. No, she was desperate to salvage the image of herself. She wanted the world to see the loyal sister, the glowing mother-to-be, the woman who simply fell in love. But I had the truth, and the truth left no room for illusions. Mark grew more reckless. Rumors swirled around town about his sudden absences from work, about investors whispering doubts behind closed doors. His arrogance had always been his armor, but I watched it chip away piece by piece until all that was left was a man cornered by his own lies. When he looked at me in court, it wasn't with love or even hatred. It was with fear. He knew I had the power to strip away everything he thought untouchable. The turning point came on a gray Wednesday morning. The courtroom was colder than usual, the air thick with tension. My lawyer stood with calm authority as she presented the final set of documents, proof not only of Mark's infidelity, but of his embezzlement. The judge's eyes narrowed as he read through the papers, and the silence in that room was deafening. Mark's lawyer tried to object, his words stumbling over themselves, but the judge's gavel silenced him. And then, like a thunderclap, came the order: a full investigation into Mark's finances, immediate freezing of his assets, and a mandate for temporary spousal support in my favor. The room erupted in murmurs. Mark's face went ashen. Lauren's hands trembled where they rested on her swollen belly. And me, I sat there still and silent, but inside a storm of vindication raged. For the first time, I saw the cracks in their fortress of lies crumble into dust. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled at me like stones. How do you feel about your husband's betrayal? What will happen to your sister's child? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence, my calm walk to the waiting car said more than any words could. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city glowed below me, life pulsing forward, as if my own world hadn't been torn apart. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt steady. I thought of the Emily who had sat crying in that restaurant bathroom on her birthday, broken and humiliated. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the unthinkable and survived. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt anymore. It did. The pain of knowing my sister carried my husband's child, the grief of losing not just a partner, but a family I once trusted, it still cut deep. But now, alongside that pain, there was something else. Strength, resolve. A quiet kind of power that came from knowing the worst had already happened and I was still standing. When I finally crawled into bed that night, I whispered to myself the truth I had earned. They didn't break me. They revealed me. The final hearing arrived on a day that seemed almost too bright for the darkness it was meant to hold. The sky was clear, sunlight spilling through the courthouse windows as if mocking the storm inside me. I wore black not as mourning, but as armor. Every step down those marble hallways echoed with the weight of months of silence, discovery, and fire forged into resolve. Mark and Lauren were already seated when I entered. Lauren looked pale, exhaustion carved into her face. Her hands folded over her stomach in a desperate display of innocence. Mark, on the other hand, wore the mask I knew too well, jaw-tight lips pressed thin, his eyes scanning the room like a soldier searching for an escape route. He found none. When the judge entered the room hushed, my lawyer rose, her voice steady, as she laid out the evidence one final time. The affair, the pregnancy, the embezzlement, the betrayal that was both personal and criminal. Each word struck like a hammer, dismantling the fragile house of lies Mark and Lauren had built. Mark tried to interject, his lawyer sputtering objections, but the weight of proof was undeniable. His arrogance faltered, his voice cracked, and for the first time I saw him for what he truly was, not a husband, not even a man of power, but a coward who thought deceit could buy him freedom. Lauren wept openly, her tears soaking into the sleeve of her blouse. At one point, she turned toward me, her lips shaping the word, please. But I didn't flinch. I had wept enough tears for both of us. Now I was stone. When the gavel finally fell, it was like the closing of a chapter I never asked to write. Divorce granted. Assets divided in my favor. Custody of my future secured while theirs lay in ruin. And as if fate itself wanted to brand the moment the judge ordered an official investigation into Mark's financial dealings, his empire was no longer his. It was crumbling brick by brick under the weight of truth. As the courtroom emptied, Lauren remained seated, her sobs soft but unrelenting. Mark stormed out, shoulders rigid, reporters chasing after him like vultures after prey. I rose slowly, feeling the eyes of the room on me, but this time I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. Not as a victim, not as a woman undone, but as someone who had walked through betrayal's fire and come out forged into steel. Outside, the air was crisp, almost sweet. Jessica was waiting on the steps, her arms wide, her eyes shining with pride. I fell into her embrace, not because I was weak, but because I finally allowed myself to feel the relief I had been holding back. "You did it," she whispered. And for the first time in so long, I believed it. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I lit a single candle. Not for Mark, not for Lauren, not even for the marriage I had lost. I lit it for myself, for Emily, the woman who had been broken, humiliated, betrayed, and yet had refused to vanish. I sat by the flickering flame and thought about the lesson carved into my bones. Betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships. It reveals character. Theirs and mine. They chose deceit. I chose survival. And in that choice, I found a version of myself stronger than I had ever imagined. So when I tell this story now, it's not with shame. It's with the hope that someone listening will hear what I finally learned, that silence can be strength, that patience can be power, and that even in the ashes of betrayal, you can rise. Please, if my story touched you, support this channel. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories told from the raw edges of life, and leave a comment with your own truths. Because healing doesn't happen alone, it happens when we speak, when we listen, and when we refuse to let betrayal have the last word.